Good morning. Good morning. Awesome. So, quick question before I start lecturing. Hopefully, you were able to read my email regarding our client. So, you should really think about which which communication plan you want to target. The Because our client, I believe, represents the Directors Guild of America, but he also works on The Good Doctor, the ABC television show. And so bear in mind on what you want to tackle. You want to tackle, in essence, a diversity question that we're sending out a message to various stakeholders like cable networks, television networks, film studios, streaming services, perhaps universities, et cetera, et cetera. Or do you want to come up with a crisis plan in case there's pushback on the fact that Freddie Highmore, who stars in The Good Doctor, I don't know if you've ever seen the show. It's actually a pretty good show. He's actually not autistic, but he plays an autistic doctor on the show. And so one of the concerns of our client is that there might be some significant pushback, or I think there already has been a little bit, about the fact that he's not autistic and he's playing an autistic person. And some people believe that it's important to have, if you're going to cast somebody, right, as autistic, they should also be autistic. I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one. So think about it. All right, maybe I should send out a survey to see what you guys want to do. Any questions, comments, concerns? I'm not familiar with that movie, Alexa. What happened? And so something similar happened in that particular movie? Was there pushback because the actress wasn't autistic? Hmm. Okay. Well. Oh. An ableist. We're living in some interesting times. Okay. Well, then yes, it's something similar to that. So basically, he wants to know if we can come up with a good plan, right, to address that issue if that becomes a big problem. Which, again, I think it already was a little bit of a problem, but I'm not really 100% sure. He can tell you all about it if that's the option, if that's the route you want to take, and give you some insight about what was said, what was done. I'm not sure. I think both case studies are extremely interesting. The autistic one is that's a hard one. So I don't know. That's a hard one. I think it's harder than the GGA one, but it's up to you if what you find more interesting and what you find more challenging. What we try to do in this case study classes, right, is try to present you with some real life, real world situations and to see how you deal with these real life complex situations. And certainly, right, both the Directors Guild and the case with The Good Doctor are both examples of that. They're both they're tricky. So that's right, Gabriella. Your group comes together, and you kind of come up with a plan to see which plan better addresses whatever the problem, whether it's the Directors Guild's problem or whether it's the Good Doctor's problem. I'm not sure which you're going to choose to do. Again, I should do some sort of survey and ask all of you what you want to do. But both are tough. I think the Good Doctor might be tougher, but I think they're both tough. Any questions? So the week of the 22nd, I know we're supposed to meet on the 24th, but he may not be able to meet with us on the 24th. So please try to remain open for that week, just in case he could only meet with us on a Monday. So he's going to try to see if he can fit us into his schedule. He is a busy person, so he's working on all sorts of different projects. Questions, questions, questions. Yes, Jesse. Oh. Oh my God. That's funny. No problem. Don't worry about it. That's fine. I have my son running around me, so it's fine. Okay. Oh my God. Thank you for that. All right. Also, hopefully, if you have any questions regarding your group projects, I will provide you with some feedback regarding your group plans. And so hopefully you have some good ideas. I'm looking forward to reading those. All right. So for the remainder of this lecture, oh man, I'm trying to clear my throat. We're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of various ways to advertise. So I'm not sure, again, I haven't read your group plans yet for some of you. So I'm not really quite sure how your product was advertised. And so for everything that you do, going back to the idea of perfection, there's strengths and weaknesses to whatever tactic you utilize in a integrated marketing plan. And so again, think about the strengths, which are at least to my left-hand side, and the weaknesses, which are to my right-hand side. So for mobile media advertising, obviously the strength would be popularity. Most of us have some sort of mobile device, so it's easy to reach us through advertising. If you're going to utilize or try to reach us on our mobile devices, it's fairly easy. The idea of mobile web searches, this idea that you can interact with the ad on some level and search for more research and those sorts of things is only going to get better as our technology gets better. So that's a good thing, at least in terms of the customer, but also in terms of who's advertising. Costs. Generally speaking, any sort of advertising right on mobile media, because it's smaller, usually a smaller platform, it's generally speaking costs less than, let's say, advertising on network TV or on cable television. It's generally less than that, so the cost is not so high. The other thing that's great about mobile media marketing is the fact that you can geo-target. So for instance, right, you can send out an ad nowadays by geo-targeting a specific zip code or a specific area. So let's just say hypothetically you were only going to release a movie, let's say in Los Angeles, and that's it. And let's just say you're targeting, I don't know, maybe Asian Americans, right? Perhaps with your movie. Maybe you're only going to release this movie on a couple of screens in the Los Angeles area. Through geo-targeting, you can find the zip codes, right, with the highest number of people, whether you're targeting them on because it's an art film, or maybe because you're targeting because they're Asian. Regardless, either way, is you can geo-target people through this using zip codes and some other factors to reach that audience in a very strategic way and in a very efficient way, and also in a very effective way. This idea of geo-targeting, going back to the idea of costs. I mean, it's a little more expensive to do geo-targeting, but you can do it. And in the long run, it's actually a really effective way of reaching your audience. Another way of thinking about this idea of geo-targeting, if you're doing pop-ups, for instance, in a specific location, right? And so you can literally send out a message to people who live right by whatever that pop-up's at, send them a message and say, hey, there's a pop-up over here, or there's a sale and you can buy stuff at our pop-up store. So this idea of geo-targeting is really effective. Database development. So customers might be more apt to read your message because nowadays customers have the option of opting in for more research, going back to the idea of data, right? Sometimes some customers are gladly willing to give you their data, their information. And so because they're opting in a lot of cases, they're more apt to read your ads. Buzz building or awareness, in other words, another word for buzz is also awareness, is that essentially through mobile media advertising, you can generate a word of mouth very quickly. You can generate a buzz very fast. And so buzz building or building awareness, it's a strength. So intrusive. Now, the weaknesses. Some people may find these messages rather annoying and rather intrusive. I personally, even though I may have opted in at one point in time, find these ads that pop up on my phone to be annoying, at least for me at times. And so that's a weakness. People may find it annoying. Number two, weakness, message link. Because you're on a small platform and your relatively small device, which is on your phone, the message length has to be really short, and it also has to be really informative. And it's really hard to do both, right? It's really hard to be short and informative. So that's a huge challenge to be able to do both. Message type. And this is a big question, and people are still trying to figure this out. What's the most effective way to reach your target audience using this sort of advertising? And that's still to be determined. Nobody has figured this out, at least not even close to 100%. I think part of it is that you younger folks are really an interesting group, and us older folks are trying to figure you out, and we haven't figured you out yet because you're a complex group, and so trying to get you to do right, what type of message is actually going to get you to do, meaning to buy, is quite difficult, and we haven't figured it out yet. Maybe you guys will figure it out since you are part of that group. Opting out. It's very easy to delete these messages as well as to block the messages. Going back to the idea of intrusive. And so very easy with our technology, just as easily as you opted in, you can easily opt out. Technology. And so this runs the gamut, right? Some of you are super hip and super into technology when it comes to your phone, right? You get the latest and greatest phones as soon as they come out. And you have other folks who, may still have flip phones for whatever reason. And so the technology varies on mobile devices, even within the target audience. And so it's hard to know what is the capabilities of your mobile devices. Some of you, again, are hip and, state of the art, and some of you are dinosaurs and have old technology. Not that my generation matters because I'm Gen X, but I'm kind of a dinosaur, and I still have a super old iPhone because I don't really feel the need to get a newer iPhone. But I know that amongst my peers, some of my peers have, the latest, greatest, and newest technology. I just happen not to be one of those. And then reach, how to reach your target audience who is currently shopping with a relevant message. So again, goes back to the idea of message type is when somebody's shopping, how do you get somebody and get them to respond with the relevant message as they're shopping? Because again, if they're me, I'm not looking at my phone while I'm shopping. I'm too busy shopping, trying to make sure my toddler is not, knocking something down off the shelf or grabbing something off the shelf and putting it on his mouth. I don't really have time to be looking at my phone while I'm shopping. And so that's the problem. But for some of you who do look at your phones while you're shopping, okay, well, what's the most relevant message to reach you? And again, to get you to do. That's a challenge. This is a tricky one. So again, when you're studying your case study, did they utilize mobile media advertising? Was it effective? Why or why not? Alternative media. So this could range from product placements in movies or television programs to cinema advertising. In other words, and I wonder why this is not utilized more, but prior to COVID, if you ever went to the movies, oftentimes you would see ads that would come up on the screen before the actual trailer. And this, I don't know about you guys, but these ads would pop up, 3 or 4 times. And so for me, I was always like, this is actually really quite effective because we're kind of here. We're kind of a captive audience waiting for the trailers to pop up. And so alternative media centers on also cinema or even other sort of weird advertising, like you might see advertising on coffee cups, for instance, especially the holders, right? The sleeves you put on the coffee cups. And even sometimes the coffee cups themselves could be part of the advertisement. So strengths. Exposure is that many of these vehicles target to and from work or shops or more personalized. So a lot of us are creatures of habit, right? We go to our favorite coffee store, which may be Starbucks, but it may be something else. And we go to these coffee stores almost every day. At least I used to, pre-COVID. If I was ever going to do research or if early day at the university, I would stop at my favorite coffee shop, grab a cup of coffee and go. And oftentimes they would put interesting things on their sleeves because it was an independent coffee store. And so this was I thought a really effective way of reaching people as they're going to and from work, or sometimes if they're shopping, because my favorite coffee shop is in this area where there's lots of little sort of indie stores. It's in Long Beach, and so it's also a cool place as you're shopping, drinking a cup of coffee, those sorts of things. And it's can be considered to be more personalized because it's kind of indie. Creative, you can be as creative as you want to be, especially with the coffee cup stuff and the sleeves. Product placement, you can be really creative in terms of how you want to place your product in a movie or television program. With cinema advertising, you can also be somewhat creative, although not really. It's kind of just oftentimes just an advertisement. Engaging, especially with product placement. Your product placement can be quite engaging, especially if it becomes viral or if it generates a positive word of mouth on social media. So internet traction, it could happen, especially for product placements. If you think about Talladega Nights, and that famous scene, right, with Jesus, and you see these product placements as they're having Thanksgiving dinner, but they're not really having turkey. They're having, Domino's and Coke and all this other sort of stuff. If you ever watched that movie. Cost. So cost, depending on what you choose, it can be relatively inexpensive. So product placement, depending on the movie, depending on the producer, could be relatively inexpensive, As a matter of fact, it can be free. So for instance, if you think about the Italian Job, those Mini Coopers, right, that were placed in the movie, um, just based on the information that I received, which is pretty accurate, they didn't pay anything to place those cars in the movie. The producer needed cars to wreck, and essentially the Mini Cooper wanted to introduce itself to the marketplace, and so they said, "We'll give you the cars." So it could be relatively inexpensive, relatively, depending on the movie and depending on the director and those sorts of things. Non-intrusive, so it's customers opt in, especially for product placement. For the movies, obviously, we choose to go to the movies, so they're running an ad. They're running an ad. We're opting in. And for coffee cups, again, whether it's the sleeve, whether it's the cup itself, we're choosing to buy that cup of coffee, and so we're opting in. It's not intrusive. For the most part, generally speaking, we don't find it annoying. Now, the weaknesses, clutter. As I've been saying this over and over again, and if you've watched the lecture from Monday, one of the things that I keep repeating is this idea of clutter. So did your campaign fail because, yes, they did advertising, but this just clutter. It got lost in the advertising clutter. And so that's one of the downsides is that, people just may forget about you because it's just another ad and they've seen hundreds of ads, right, that day. Or they will see 100 ads that day. The value, the target audience must opt in. So is it really worth it if the target audience must opt in, right? Because you're relying on the target audience to opt in, and not everybody is going to opt in. So hence, then is it worth it, right? Duration. Buzz doesn't last long, especially in a 24-hour news cycle. So it's only going to last as long as people talk about the product. So in many cases, this sort of thing might only be a fad, right? May only last for a day, especially if it doesn't get any traction on the internet. Then it might only last for a short period of time. ROI, return on investment. It's really hard to determine, right, whether or not this was worth it. It's very difficult to tell. Sometimes it's easy to tell, but sometimes it's very difficult. So for product placements, right, it's easier to tell. You might see a bump right after the movie is released or the television program, right? You might see a bump in your sales. So for product placement, it might be a little bit easier. For cinema advertising or coffee cups or coffee sleeves, anything like that, might be more difficult to tell. Costs. It could be really expensive. Going back to the idea of product placement, it can be free, but it could also be really expensive. Coffee cups put ads on a coffee cup or put advertisements on coffee sleeves can be rather expensive. And so you don't really know because you're actually doing, specialized advertising, which takes some time. And limited copy, especially with coffee cups, coffee sleeves, and even for product placements. Surfaces can be small, or they can be unusually shaped, or again, there could be go back to the idea of clutter, and so you can't hold a lot of information with limited space. And even on those advertisements that come on before the movie, it's just really a static image. And I know, yes, a screen is rather large, but even if you look at the amount of information on the screen, it doesn't have a lot of information on there. You have limited space. And again, most people are the only to movie. So that's the challenge. Yes, go ahead.
Ponte, I have a question. Is this slide, is it a mix? It's a mix of strength and weaknesses. Is like the left side the strength and the right side the weaknesses, or is it just a mix? Because you have cost twice on there. So is that considered a strength and a weakness?
The strength and a weakness. It could be really expensive to place a product placement. In other words, the producer might charge you a significant amount of money to place your product into a movie, or it could be free. They don't
Oh,
charge you
okay.
anything.
So are each of the bullet points a strength and a weakness too?
So
Like
on the right
depending on
hand,
what you see it.
so on the left hand side,
Uh-huh.
this side, left hand side, strength. Right hand side, weakness.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hmm? So direct advertising. So this is the last thing about strengths and weaknesses. So I don't know if you guys ever get direct mail. I do, but I don't know about some of you do. So direct advertising, in other words, personalization, strength. So this company will send you a personalized letter. They have my address, they have my name. Oftentimes they misspell my name because I guess Puente is weird. So they always think I'm Fuente, or they always add an S, Puentes. But anyways, regardless, they'll try to address it to me, um, my home address, zip code and city, and all sorts of things. So personalization, that's cool. So that's a strength. You can measure success or failure with the code. In other words, if they send you a letter or if they tell you, give this code, they know whether or not this campaign succeeded or failed. Database, going back to the idea of data again. So the target again provides their information, and oftentimes they provide you with their individual needs. And so with direct advertising, you're trying to fulfill that need with your product, whether your product happens to be a video game, whatever. And so you're utilizing the data information that you gathered from your from your target audience, which again means that they're opting in. And consumer response. This gives the customer a feeling that there's some sort of two-way communication between themselves and the marketer. So this idea of personalized message, direct advertising is the strengths. The weaknesses, it costs a lot of money and time, especially money, to personalize every single letter that you send out. It costs a lot of money, um, especially if you think about, you're not sending it to that many people per se. Clutter, this goes back to everything I've been saying over and over again. In this case, mail. Think about I don't know how much junk mail you guys get, but I get a lot of junk mail, honestly. And so clutter, there's a lot of things that I get in the mail that I don't even open. I see it and they go, oh gosh, and I just throw it away. And a lot of people throw away direct advertising. Just grab it and throw it in the trash. It's clutter, just garbage. I throw it in our recycling bin. Limited reach, because you're personalizing the letter, right? You're only reaching one person with that one message. And time constraints. And trust me, as somebody who used to do special events, we used to do direct advertising to our clientele. In other words, people would give us their data, right? They would give us like their information, so their mailing address, those sorts of things. And so we would essentially, buy hundreds or order hundreds of envelopes, and we would print them on a certain type of letterhead. But oh my God, the amount of time and paper cuts, mind you, that you have by folding or stapling or stuffing or even running the letters through the stamp machines, it takes forever. And mind you, we probably only did, when I used to do special events, we probably only did about 7,000 letters. And it would take us, I'm not kidding, probably about a week to do 7,000 letters. So the time constraints is pretty immense. So that's a weakness because you really need to spend a lot of time with direct advertising. So any questions on strengths and weaknesses of various types of ways of advertising? So when you guys are doing your evaluation, you should be taking note, those of you who are doing the evaluations, and those of you who are doing the 4Ps, bear in mind, and those of you who are doing tactics, those sorts of things, bear in mind the things that they utilized, and then those of you who are doing the evaluations, think about, okay, even though it might have been quote unquote successful, what were some weaknesses? In other words, they spend too much money on television. Did they do direct advertising when they didn't need to? In other words, it was just the idea of spending out personalized letters and how much time it takes, probably not a good idea. So think about the strengths and think about the weaknesses as you're examining the campaign in the evaluation process. Any questions? Time is it? 12:05. No questions? All right, so now we're moving on to a different section, which is market research. And this lecture applies to, again, the person who's doing the evaluation. Obviously, the person who's doing the target audience really wants to pay attention to this particular lecture on market research. So basically, right, the definition of this is this is the definition now, it is a precise and focused strategy with the single aim of providing data which will be useful in an organization's marketing activities. So again, it is a precise and focused strategy with the single aim of providing data which will be helpful in a organization's marketing activities. So third time, it is a precise and focused strategy with the single aim of providing data which will be useful in an organization's marketing activities. So, right, so if you think about it, market research is going to be helpful in identifying your primary target audience. Again, who are the folks that are more apt to utilize your product or buy your product? Think about your secondary target audience, right? Who are these outside influencers? Now, the outside influencers is not your primary target audience, but guess what? They can influence your primary target audience, right? So, like a trusted figure, for instance, like a parent could be a secondary target market who could influence your primary target market to buy a certain product or utilize a certain product. Also think about the idea of psychographics, because market research can also help you identify psychographics, right? What's the personality of the people who are going to be using your products? So when I talk about primary target audience, I'm not just necessarily talking about demographics. I'm also referring to what is their psychographics. Helpful in evaluating an organization's current performance. This is important because one of the things that, especially for younger folks, is that you're very verbal and very good at giving feedback. And so doing market research is really critical for an organization to keep ahead of its competition, right? Or if it's falling behind. Right? One way of figuring out, okay, what are we not doing here, is to do some market research, and you can figure out, oh, our target audience feels like we're not doing X or we're not doing Y, and this is the reason why we're falling behind. So maybe maybe you're not doing enough. That organization is not doing enough in terms of social justice, right? We know that social justice for younger folks is really important, and so if that organization is not supporting certain causes or maybe is supporting certain causes, it's being frowned upon by its target audience. Hence, it might be falling behind its competitors. Or maybe the technology of the organization is falling behind, and so maybe the target audience prefers another organization because its technology is better. So it's really important or critical for helping an organization understand its current performance, whether it wants to remain a leader or maybe it's falling behind on some aspect. It's also really helpful in selecting the most effective ways to market a product. So for instance, right, we know that a lot of you use social media. Now, the big trick is, okay, so what platforms do we advertise these products? Do we place our ads on YouTube? Where do we place our advertisements? Or which platforms? What's the most effective way to market our product that's more apt to reach the target audience? Because we know, for instance, that you guys, for the most part, and I say you guys as men and women, for instance, don't really read the newspaper. Okay, we know that if you're trying to reach young folks, newspaper is probably not so good. So maybe television, but even then, right? We know that TV, a lot of you don't watch traditional network television. You're probably watching Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon or something like that. So what's the most effective way to market a product that's going to actually reach or be seen by its target audience? Also, it's very helpful in identifying opportunities in developing and promoting products that take advantage of these opportunities. So one of the things that you can figure out with market research to a certain extent is trends, at least future trends. You can figure out, okay, if we start making more of these types of films, for instance, moving forward, we know these sorts of films or television programs are going to be successful moving forward based on our data. So any questions? So for instance, going back to the idea of Disney Plus, I'm sure that Disney did a significant amount of research and also just looking at the market trends to figure out, oh, people are cutting the cord, and so we better start our own streaming service, and we better start it now, even though we're starting a little bit late. But this is going to be the most effective way of reaching our target audience moving forward. All right, so there's different types of research, and one of the things that I'm gonna, especially people doing the market research part, is take into account what type of research was utilized if you can find it. Sometimes finding research can be kind of hard, so you really need to put in the time, or at least know where to look. So anyways, qualitative. So qualitative research means that they use open-ended questions. That's really, I'm talking about qualitative data. So generally speaking, these are open-ended questions. Usually they're done through interviews. I gave you the example of focus groups. And usually when I mean focus groups, I'm talking about a small group of people. Generally, you don't want a focus group to be more than 10 people. I mean, I've seen focus groups that are up to 12. But once you really get it beyond 12, it gets really tricky. You really want it to be pretty small. You can do convenience polling, where you ask people a series of questions. Again, focus groups, and really where you're trying to glean or collect our opinions, perceptions, and attitudes. And really qualitative it takes a lot of time. Mind you, again, I am not asking you to go out there and do qualitative research. I'm asking you to go find if they did qualitative research. So that's what you should be looking for. So examples, again, in-depth interviews, focus groups, ethnographies. Now, ethnographies are really tricky, and generally speaking, companies in entertainment don't do this, generally speaking. Sometimes they do, but generally not. Ethnographies really mean that you're living with the community, and so that takes a whole lot of time because you're really living with this group. You're having dinner with this group. You're going to the same restaurants and same movies and same everything with this group. So it's difficult. So on the other hand, there's quantitative. Quantitative is the information that's generally speaking most gathered in entertainment or in tourism, generally speaking again. And so this is close-ended. So quantitative, close-ended, qualitative, open-ended. These are generally more controlled. They're the people are given a pre-selected set of responses, right? Like, don't like, and maybe they have something don't know, or maybe they have other questions, right? Sometimes they ask like, agree, somewhat agree, okay, or something like that, yes and no. I disagree, I somewhat disagree, I disagree. They ask you all these preset responses. A lot of these are done face to face, sometimes they're telephone interviews, sometimes they're online, like a Survey Monkey sort of thing. And you have to rely very heavily on people to self-complete it. Sometimes the bad part about having people complete this, especially when you're not looking at them, that they just race through the questionnaires and don't even really read the questions. So you have to rely very heavily and trust the people who are completing these surveys. So, quantitative is easier to gather. Some would say less reliable. Qualitative is harder to collect. Some would say it's more reliable. It really depends. So some examples of what I'm talking about. Hold on, let me go back. So would this be an example of what I mean by quantitative, right? Data. So obviously Nielsen in this particular case did a lot of research about all these different age groups based off of their demographics to figure out their usage of media. And so as you can see here, right? Young folks spend a lot of time, or at least younger folks, but you guys don't spend a lot of time watching television, probably because you're busy at work or you're busy at school, versus older folks who are plus 65, right? They spend over 7 hours on television. So that's a lot of time. Also, one other thing that you can kind of glean from this information is you guys are more apt to spend time on the internet. So versus older folks who spend less time on the internet. So this would be an example of quantitative data. And so if you ever look on Nielsen, for those of you doing anything on TV, you may find stuff on movies. They do a lot of good quantitative analysis that you guys can utilize for your case study. So qualitative. So there are examples of qualitative. The movie industry does a lot of qualitative research. For instance, because in Hollywood you spend so much money in terms of production and in terms of marketing costs, right? You can easily spend 300, 400, 500 million dollars on a movie. It's very easy to spend that kind of money. And so Hollywood wants to avoid box office busts, as much as possible. And so what they want to do is like, okay, figure out why movies fail, but not only that, they try to figure out, okay, how do we solve these issues? So for instance, right, what are the top reasons that movies fail? Number one reason is relevancy. Relevancy or not relevant to the target audience is the number one reason why movies fail, right? So the movie's not interesting to the target audience. The character was not relatable to the target audience. Maybe that character was perfect, whatever. And so their way of solving this problem of relevancy is essentially, okay, we need to develop universal themes. In other words, themes that all of us can relate to, right? All of us can relate to the idea of falling in love. All of us can relate to the idea of having your heart broken. All of us can relate to the idea of death, right? Whether you've lost somebody that's close to you, maybe you've lost a pet, I don't know, but you can all sort of relate to the idea, regardless of where you live, where you're from, your class, any of those sorts of things. Um, you understand that when somebody dies or an animal dies that's close to you, right, or a pet, it hurts, right? You understand this. You all understand the idea of good versus evil, and you all understand sort of the idea of coming of age. It's the idea of going through junior high when we have pimples, right? We're all sort of developing at different rates, and it's kind of an awkward time if you're a male or female, right? It's kind of weird, and it's just awkward. It's strange, and we all experience those to various degrees, and so they're universal themes. And so what Hollywood's trying to do, right, is to develop, for the most part, these sorts of themes in its movies, so that way they become relatable and they reduce the possibility of a box office bust, even though, of course, some movies do bust. And the other thing they try to develop is aspirational, in other words, characters that we look up to, right? Role models, characters that we can relate to on some level. And so they try to develop this idea of universal characters, right? That regardless of our race, regardless of our gender, right, sexual orientation, whatever, that on some level we can relate to this character. And so that's what Hollywood's trying to do, to resolve the idea of relevancy, right? And market research has played an important role for Hollywood, the studios, in terms of trying to develop these different types of characters and these different types of stories to solve this problem. The number two biggest problem for Hollywood movies, based on their research now, is action and excitement issues. In other words, the story is just too boring, too slow, not suspenseful enough, not enough action. So one thing that is for sure true, no question about it, the movies have to move faster for a younger audience. So for me, right, I'm old, and so I remember the days when stories were, 2.5 hours long, 3 hours long. It didn't really matter the length of the movie. I was kind of like, if I kind of got into the character, then it didn't really matter if it moved too slow. But for instance, I still teach 301 sometimes. But has anybody ever seen the movie Chinatown or heard of the movie Chinatown? Jack Nicholson, right? Yes, yeah. Yes, Jack. Thank you, Natalie. You're the only person who's heard of Chinatown. One of the best, Alexis, yes, good. It's considered to be one of the better movies ever made in Hollywood. It's one of the better ones. It is a really good movie, at least by people who are film snobs, like myself, I suppose. But I used to show that movie to my students in 301, Com 301, because one of the things that I would do in Com 301 is like, let's watch a movie and let's break down the story. And so we would watch the movie, and almost every single student would tell me, Puente, why are we watching this movie? This movie is so slow. Oh my God, it's boring. And, I would think to myself, what are you talking about? Really boring? Gosh, this is such a good movie. But then, I had a flash bulb moment. I was like, oh, damn, of course. The first act is like 30 minutes long in that movie. Of course, most of you guys or ladies are just used to watching a movie where the first act is only 10 minutes. And then you jump into the second act and everything moves faster in modern day movies, in more modern movies. And so, yeah, of course, yes, it makes complete sense. And so if you notice movies nowadays, is that they try to move faster through the story, right? They add in more suspense, they add in more action to try to keep you engaged. Um, because there's a time factor for movies. They understand, and if you think about a lot of movies, most movies nowadays are less than 2 hours long. And if they're 90 minutes, even better, especially for exhibitors. So time factor is important. Having a compelling battle is important. You know, this idea of what's in it for the hero or heroine, and this idea of having to surprise or re-engage the audience over and over again. So movies or Hollywood has embedded a lot more action into the story. And again, if you watch these older movies, right, like, you know, from the 60s, the movies go much slower. It's much more drawn out. And more the modern films move faster. So that tries to solve the excitement or action issues. Third biggest reason why movies fail, according to the market research, is humor issues. Is that a lot of you don't find these movies funny enough, right? Again, their attempts at humor failed. And writing humor, by the way, is probably the hardest sort of writing because humor is so culturally specific and it's so individual. And so this idea of writing humor, very difficult. And so what Hollywood's done to try to solve this issue is this idea of go extreme. In other words, go over the top with their humor, you know, or be extra gross. If you think about Jackass, for instance, I don't know if anybody's ever seen those movies, really gross, but huge hits for whatever reason. But oh my God, some of the things they would do, I would be like, how is this funny? I don't understand. Again, I'm old. I don't get that humor, but that's fine. The idea of be embarrassing, this idea of being embarrassed, or the idea of having jokes that are even painful. Has anybody ever watched, what are those guys? The guys who Impractical, is it Impractical Jokers or Jokers? You guys know what I'm talking about? Where they do those jokes and they play pranks on one another. Yes, those guys have tapped into this. Yes, yes, yes. Impractical, thank you. Impractical Jokers. Those guys, again, I don't think they're really funny. Sometimes they're funny, but they are really, if you ever watch them, they are good at this. This idea of doing things that can be really embarrassing. They can be really painful. They go, all out. And sometimes they're pretty funny, but I know that type of humor works. It works with a particular type of audience, especially the younger audience. I think it really works. These guys they've caught on to something really good. The last reason why movies fail is complexity. And so in other words, the stories are too confusing, too hard to follow. And so what Hollywood's tried to do to not lose the audience is to simplify the story, not try to be so clever. And so sort of lay out the plot easier. So in some ways, Hollywood's trying to sort of dumb down its stories in some level. I don't know if you've watched the what's that movie called? The Leonardo DiCaprio movie where he's spinning a top, or is he spinning a coin? I can't remember the name of the movie. That's a kind of a complex story. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Inception. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if you ever watched Inception, right? It's kind of a complex story. If you've watched it, it's a really good movie. Or No Country for Old Men would be another example of that. These stories are kind of complex, and so nowadays, what Hollywood's trying to do to reduce busts, to reduce the complexity of stories, they're simplifying them. Yeah, that too. So if you want to watch more complex stories, you have to watch their art division movies. They're still making those kind of movies, just not they're not releasing those to super wide audiences. So more market research, and this time they do it by sometimes by gender, and so more examples. So the other thing that Hollywood does, and this is again quantitative but also qualitative, is that they utilize four quadrants for movie research. And so those four quadrants for movie research is men or women over the age of 25 and men and women under the age of 25. And so the importance of looking at these quadrants is when they're looking at a movie, right, in terms of they're doing research in terms of like who this movie appeals to, they look at these four quadrants, men and women, again, above and below 25. Hopefully, right, they're trying to get a movie that appeals to all four quadrants. It appeals to the women who are over 25, under 25, the men over 25 and under 25. But again, they understand that not all movies are going to be that way. And so some movies may only appeal to, let's say, women over under 25, may not appeal to men over under 25. But those four quadrants is what they're essentially going for and trying to appeal to those best four. The other sort of market research they do is concept testing, and meaning that they're testing out ideas, right? And the idea of testing out ideas is the best time to try to fulfill these four quadrants by coming up with ideas that appeal to all four of these quadrants. Now, basic needs. Basic needs is the last part of why movies fail. And so what the movie industry tries to do with stories is they try to have or try to make that film satisfy a basic need that all audiences can appeal to. So if you watch most movies, right, they appeal to a basic need. This idea of safety or survival. In other words, right, this person's on a quest to survive or trying to protect his or her family. The idea of love and belonging, this idea of acceptance. Esteem. If you watch this movie, right, it's going to make you feel better. Or if you watch this movie, it makes you want to become a better person. So all movies try to fulfill this basic need. Now, tapping into the idea of gender and the idea of movie research by gender. So basically, again, through research, the movie industry has determined these types of stories are more apt to appeal to men. Stories that center around battles or weapons or gadgets, movies that center around power, right? Who possesses power or trying to attain power. The idea of being tough or winning. Those sorts of stories are more apt to appeal to men. Now, if you look at female audiences, um, this is what historically appeals to women. The idea of relationships or friendships, the idea of romance, the idea of being sweet but also being sassy, the idea of beauty and cuteness. Another one that's sort of emerging with women is this idea of being tough or being gritty is sort of starting to emerge amongst female viewers as a trend. So I think one of the things that you're going to start seeing in the future, especially pertaining to heroines, is, and I think you're already seeing it, is this idea of grit. This idea that, yeah, it's okay to be sweet, but it's also important to be sassy or gritty. And I think that those sorts of movies, I think, are going to become more popular moving forward. Yes, Alexis. Um, Families would, depending on, because you're looking at a family individually, you would be breaking it down by mother, father, children. So it'd be all four quadrants. If you're trying to appeal to families, which what Disney does really well, essentially what they're doing is appealing to all four quadrants. Good question. So, one last thing before getting out of the idea of gender. So, regardless of gender, right, tone is really important. So, the feeling that a person gets from watching a movie, regardless of gender, is really important, especially if you want to appeal again to all four quadrants, right? So, tone is really important. Um, and generally speaking, this is why we have happy endings for movies for the most part, generally speaking, is that people go to the movies because they make us feel better, generally speaking. And so, people don't go to the movies because they want to be depressed. People want to walk out of the movie feeling hopeful, feeling happy for the most part. And so, this is why Hollywood, if they want to produce blockbusters, which they do, um, almost always, right, the hero or the heroine wins because people want to walk out happy. And this is why, for the most part, generally speaking, people don't watch documentaries or people don't watch art films because when you walk out of those documentaries or art films, well, sometimes you walk out depressed, going, "Wow, our society's heading in a terrible direction," or maybe the hero or heroine um, didn't win. And so, one thing that they've discovered is people want to walk out of the movie theaters happy, not sad. So, more examples of quantitative, right? If you look at, again, how Hollywood's released movies in the past. Um, and so, if you're doing anything with motion pictures, the Motion Picture Association of America, or the MPAA, does a lot of research. And so, go onto their website and find their research information. They already did a lot of primary research for you. So use it, use it, use it, use it. So, anyways, so this is some data that I got off of the Motion Picture Association of America. I think this was this was their 2020 report. I don't know if they've done a report for 2021 yet. But anyways, as you can see here, right, based off of age, they can determine who is most apt to go to the movies based off of their demographics. And they even break it down by race and ethnicity. So as you can see here, right, the people who are more apt to go to the movies based on their data are people who are between the ages of 12 and 17, as well as people who are between the ages of 18 to 24. So younger folks are more apt to go to the movies than people who are a little bit older. As you can see here, right, people, once they reach the age of 40, um, you know, start to go to the movies less. I think because nowadays a lot of us have little kids, and it is hard to go to the movies when you have little kids. It's a production. Everything's a production. Even getting a babysitter is a production. So I think that people, as we get older, you're less apt to go to the movies. And so if you look at race and ethnicity, one thing you can tell is that Latinos or Latinx that's the group that is most apt to go to the movies. right? And then a close second would be Asian Americans. Would be the second group that's more apt to go to the movies based off of their data. And so, you know, as studios go, you might wonder, well, why is that then there's not more stories that center around Latinos or Asians that Hollywood's making if they are the principal moviegoers? The thing is, at least I won't speak for Asians, I'll only speak for Latinos. The thing about Latino viewers is I don't think that Latinos necessarily care that much about who is the lead character in terms of race or ethnicity. At least I don't think they do. They're more apt to go watch a movie even when the hero or heroine is a white Caucasian. I don't think they care, at least based on their movie going. Maybe that will change as we move forward. I don't know. Um, but um, but the movie industry makes determinations in terms of like what kinds of movies do we make based off of the race and ethnicity of the attendance, but also based off of the age of the group who's most likely to go to attend the movies. Now, moving forward, I don't know if this is going to continue as we become more um, we take more in consideration the diversity of the cast. I think this may change moving forward. I don't know. Anyway, so data types. So desk research. Now, I don't know who's doing the market research for your particular group, but it takes time to to find or gather the information for market research. Unless you're doing a movie, in that case, you can find it on the Motion Picture Association of America, or maybe you're doing it on video games. In that case, the ESA does research for you. Find that information. If you're doing it on television, then Nielsen may have that information, whether it's streaming or cable or network TV. So there is information out there. You got to find it, but that means you got to sit at your desk. So desk research is really important for doing quantitative or qualitative research. So desk research essentially means sitting down on a desk, getting on the computer, and trying to find that information. That means putting in the time. Like anything in life, or a lot of things in life, if you want to do well and do it well, you got to put in the time, right? If you don't put in the time, you're not going to do well. And so if you want to find this information, you got to put in the time. And so desk research is really important for either you're doing qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, meaning that they utilize both. So primary data means it doesn't exist. It requires original research to be gathered, which means that you have to utilize sources like surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations, or experiments. Now, please do not do primary research or do collect primary data. That takes up too much time to gather primary data. And by the way, you probably have to get permission from the university to gather primary data. So don't do that. As somebody who's done primary data or gathered primary data, me, it sucks. It's terrible. It's time consuming. It takes forever. And so avoid it. Don't do it. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just talking about it for research purposes. What you should be getting is secondary data, the data that's already been collected. It's already out there for you. You just got to sit down and find it. Okay. So our library, which is not the best library, our library may have data that they've already accumulated for you. If you look into IBIS, for instance, that website IBIS, it's a really cool data that talks about different industries. So our library, our university library, forget public library, has that database. It has some good information that you can utilize. Use it. Websites. Go on to the MPA website. Find the websites that have utilized this information, which is sort of tied into the idea of trade associations. So the trade associations gathered this information and has placed it on its websites. Find the trade association that represents your particular industry, and I can assure you on their website, you can find information that will be really helpful for you doing your case study. Newspapers sometimes print this information. Sometimes they'll take, they'll take highlights of this data and they'll print it in their newspaper articles. Sometimes you might find this information on your journal articles as well. And sometimes you might find this information, or it's been gathered by the government in the form of the US Census. So secondary research is what I'm asking you to do for your case, for this particular case study. Utilize it, but this also means that you're going to have to sit down and put in the time, which means desk research, right? Questions on this idea of putting in the time? So one of the biggest things when it comes to the person doing the market research, you're going to have people within your group who are going to do a really good job with the market research. And then there's going to be some folks who just kind of think market research is really easy to gather. They're not going to spend a lot of time on it, and their grade's going to suffer. But really is, at the end of the day, the people who put in the time or know how to find the information effectively and efficiently are the ones that get the best grades on this part of the project. So types of market research. And this will be the last slide I'm talking about. So we already talked about the idea of concept testing. The studios, the networks, they do concept testing. In other words, they test out ideas or test out the casting for a film or a television program when it's in development. In other words, they'll get a focus group, or they'll ask individual people, what do you think of this idea? Would you watch a movie with this movie star in it, or this person in this television program? This typically happens in development as they're developing stories. Sometimes they might do it with titles. In other words, they have a title for a television show, and oftentimes they'll change it through research, although that happens more rarely nowadays. The second one is positioning studies. And so for positioning studies, you're examining the strength or the weakness, as well as the opportunities and threats of a particular movie or television program or whatever. And you're basically trying to figure out essentially how you should position the movie or television program so it stands out in the marketplace, right? In other words, positioning helps you figure out who should we target with this particular movie or television program. Focus groups, right, is another way of doing market research. I use the number 10 to 12, and 10 to 12 meaning the maximum. Really, it can range from 5 to 10 or 5 to 12, but really 12 is already too many. You really don't want to go beyond 12. But the reason being is because when you have more than 12 people, some of the people become introverted, become more introverted as the group gets larger. So the best way to glean out information from people is usually about 5, honestly, where people are less likely to be introverted. Anyways, you're gathering representative samples or data from a range of folks, usually 5 to 10 or 5 to 12, no more than 12, and you have them try a product to figure out whether or not they like it. So in other words, also focus groups, you can also do, you can test advertisements. In other words, you can show them a commercial and see, do you like it? Yes or no? And I think we're getting close to the end. It's already 12:45, at least according to my clock. Test screenings is where you show them the finished movie or nearly finished and test it to see whether or not they like the movie. So sometimes they'll change the ending of movies based off of test screenings. So, for instance, a famous one, I don't know if you've ever watched this movie, it's kind of an old movie, is a movie called Basic Instinct. I don't know if anybody ever watched, anybody ever seen Basic Instinct? Kirk Douglas, Glenn Close, really good movie. Oh, very good. We have people who enjoy older movies. It warms my heart. Anyways, if you ever watched that movie, they actually changed the ending to that movie. So the current version of the movie, the way it ends currently, not to spoil the ending, is not the way that wasn't the ending originally. But through focus groups, through test screenings, I should say, the studio decided to change the ending because the audience was not happy with the original ending. So they had to go back and reshoot the ending to change the ending of the movie. Now it makes you want to go watch well, it what happened to Glenn Close is not really what happened to Glenn Close in the original ending. I don't want to spoil the ending, but the way uh, whatever happens to Glenn Close at the end is not what happened to Glenn Close at the end. I don't want to be the spoiler because it is a good movie. Oh, I never watched Happy Death Day. I'm assuming that it was a sad. I'm assuming the original ending was a sad ending and they made it a happy ending. Is that true, Natalie? Or vice versa? Oh, oh, so they changed it from a happy ending to a bad ending? Hmm. Oh, I'll check it out. But if you go, everybody should go watch Basic Instinct. It is actually a really good movie. Um, and just bear in mind that whatever happened to Glenn Close at the end didn't really happen to her at the end. At least not the original ending. Because Glenn Close is the antagonist. And mind you, she's a great antagonist. I'll have to check it out. All right, so that concludes our lecture for today. On Monday, again, watch the rest of this movie or market research lecture. We'll talk about theory to a certain extent, but also next week, I do want to give some time to answer questions regarding your presentations and those sorts of things. And I may do a survey monkey just to get an idea of what you guys want to pursue in terms of like your case study. Do you want to do the Directors Guild or do you want to do something with the Good Doctor? Again, both are hard, but I think both are interesting too. That's correct, Megan. That's correct, Madison. Also, one other thing to add in for your group plan, something that's been lacking from a few of the group plans that I have read, is your timeline. In other words, right, when do you plan to have the first draft done? And you do want to have the first draft done, you know, at least, several days in advance because editing is hard. I don't know who's the editor, but really editing is probably the second hardest thing that you're going to do besides the evaluation. And so editing work is difficult. And so you really want to give time to your editor so your editor can actually edit the content. So you want to have a timeline in there in terms of like, okay, first draft, second draft. PowerPoint will be done on this day as well as the paper, those sorts of things. Timeline, as well as duties, specific duties of what everybody's doing, because it helps me grade the project because each and every one of you are being graded individually based off of your section. Because again, I'm not punishing the whole group if you're the slacker. So I guess the moral of the story is don't be the slacker. because then you'll pay the price and everybody else will be fine. Any other questions, folks? And yes, you do want to point out who exactly is doing what part. Yes, you only need one group plan, because that one group plan is basically if all of you have agreed, this is the plan. So I only need one plan per group, and then I'll provide everybody with the same comments that I gave everybody. So everybody's going to get the same identical comments. So you know what my response was to your group plan. Now, before you guys leave, and I think some of you have left. So the one difference between the group plan, and I guess I'll talk about this also next week, and the group paper, and as well as the PowerPoint, is you want to upload individually each your work onto Portfolio or Portfolio. So that's the one difference between the group plans and the final paper, is that you actually want to upload your work onto Portfolio. Where the group plans, I'm not asking you to upload that. I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what their responsibilities are. So that way there's no arguments, disagreements, or any of those sorts of things.